Now, I know many of you are tussling on a daily basis with communications, propositions, brand messages, naming, new products, new services, and all the chaos that is going around in our world right now. But I'm joined today by somebody who is going to be able to help us to cut through all the noise, because I'm joined today by Alexandra Watkins, who is the Chief Executive and self-proclaimed boss lady at Eat My Words. Welcome to the show, Alexandra.
Thank you, Neil. I'm actually the self-proclaimed Chief Executive Boss Lady.
Okay, well, we'll have that too. And of course, the naming and kind of that is part of the brand, isn't it? The naming of stuff is so critical. I mean, I know we kind of joke a little at the start here, but you'll know only too well that it's almost the make or break, isn't it, at the start of any communications exercise or journey. Why is it so important?
Because your name makes the first impression, right? It's the first thing people come in contact with. People always say, your shoes make that first impression. Well, actually, your name is even more so, and it will last longer. Yeah. So your name is no other investment you make in your business will last longer than your name. So think about it. Think about your own personal name. How long have you had that? How many times have people said it, heard it, read it? And think of your brand name the same way. It's going to be around forever. You want to get it right.
So have I got it right then? Because I kind of made a decision about 3 or 4 years ago that, with the podcast here that obviously everybody's watching and listening right at this moment, to actually self-name it and call it the Neil Wilkins Podcast. So it does what it says on the tin. You get Neil Wilkins every single time, and then you get a great guest, or you might get something I'm doing in a presentation of a webinar or something. But most of the time, the hook is me. Have I got that right? Or should I have gone for something like Eat My Words? Because that's a great brand agency name.
Thank you. Well, a lot of people use their first name in podcasts because they're the host. When you use your name as either your podcast title or the name of your business, it's who you are, your friends and family and current clients know who you are, but it doesn't say anything about you to people who might not know you. So if someone was looking for a marketing podcast and they're skimming through all the names, your name isn't going to grab them as much as a name that was more of a name that had something to do with marketing in it. Do you know what I mean?
So have I got that bit wrong then? Should it have been, the most amazing podcast on the planet for marketers.com?
Well, I'll tell you, like one of the ones that I love is Everybody Hates Marketers. Like that one gets a lot of attention. And when I was on that, I got a lot of mileage. Another one that I was on that's called Creator Science. And so it's unexpected words together, right? Because you don't think of anything creative being scientific. So when a name, or there's one, the Marketing Book Podcast, that says exactly what it is. So yeah, if you can be a little more specific, maybe have a little more fun. I'll give you an example of, well, I named one recently. I renamed one. I was actually on it. It was called 7-Figure Millennials. And the host, Brandon, it wasn't, he realized pretty early on it wasn't the right name for him, but he stuck it out. And because people would think, well, is it only for millennials? And both the audience and the guests would think that. People didn't know how to spell millennials. It's a really difficult word to spell. And 7-Figure made it focus too much on money. And then the guests were like, well, if I don't have a 7-figure business, can I be a guest? So it was a lot of that. So we rebranded him Beyond Curious. And that fit really well because the audience is beyond curious. He found this common denominator that everyone that came on his show was a curious person. So that name worked well for him, and it didn't pigeonhole him into any particular category, but it spoke to the type of audience and guests that he was seeking.
So there's a nice kind of clarity there, isn't there? That it kind of inspires because it makes you curious and you want to then know more. I mean, well, what are the qualities of a strong brand name then? I mean, because obviously, there were many different combinations of words that you could have come up with. I mean, well, what would you say would be the things that you need to look for, to make that brand name strong?
Yeah, well, I actually have a test for this, and it's very easy for people to learn. It's called the Smile and Scratch Test, and it's based on my philosophy that a name should make you smile instead of scratch your head. So, SMILE is an acronym for the 5 qualities that make a name great. Scratch is the flip side. So, to answer your question, we can go through SMILE. So, the S in SMILE stands for suggestive, and you want your name to suggest something about what your product is, product, company, service is or does. So this is an example where Neil Wilkins doesn't suggest anything about what you do. And I used to, 20 years ago when I was a freelance copywriter, I was using my name, alexandrawatkins.com, but it didn't say anything about me. And when I changed to branding my business, Eat My Words, that did say we started out naming things that make people fat and drunk. That's the name Eat My Words. And it, made a hint to writing, or, at the time I was doing copywriting and naming, and have since evolved to just naming. But that's an example of how having a brand name versus using a person's name can really, it's a different, gives somebody a different feeling. The M in SMILE stands for memorable. And people's personal names are often hard for people to remember, right? So what makes something memorable is if it's based in the familiar. So if somebody already knew someone named Neil, or knew someone with your last name, they could think, oh yeah, like that guy. But if they didn't, it's going to be harder for them to remember. We worked with I'll give you an example shortly that kind of combines all of this together. So the I in SMILE stands for imagery. And when people hear your name or see it, if they can picture something in their head, it's going to make it easier for them to recall later. People remember images much more easily than they remember words or letters. And then the L in SMILE stands for legs. And legs means that your name lends itself to a theme and that helps with extended, you can extend your brand. So let me give you an example. And this hits on all the points, including the E in SMILE that we'll talk about in a minute. So there was a publicist that we worked with named Lynette Hoy, and she just called her business Lynette Hoy PR. But Lynette Hoy didn't say anything about who she was. She was a fiery woman. She was relentless with getting in touch with the press. So we rebranded her Fire Talker PR with the tagline, hot on the press. And she calls herself the fire chief. So there's a creative title. She works in the firehouse. So she branded her office. She has packages like Controlled Burn and Fire Starter. Her webinar is called Ignite Your Visibility. And when she goes on stage or before she does a webinar, she cranks up her theme song, which is Fire by the Ohio Players. So when you have a name with legs, it gives you all of those opportunities to extend your brand, create a lot of creative opportunities. And also you get to have a theme song. And then finally, the E in SMILE stands for emotional. And you want your name to make an emotional connection with people. It's got to resonate with them. And I wrote my book, Hello, My Name is Awesome, How to Create Brand Names That Stick. And I cite a lot of examples and stories about names that we've created. And the one that people tell me about the most, like, oh, I love the story of, they always say Fire Talker. So it just shows you how much that resonates with people, and they remember it too. And it's got that twist on Firewalker, and it's really visually evocative, and it just expresses her personality. So a way to think about a name too is imagine that you are a publicist and someone is looking for recommendations of publicists, or they pull up a Yelp page, or they pull something up and they're just looking at a list of names. If your name is just your personal name and it's mixed in with Fire Talker PR, that name jumps off the page, right? Because it immediately says something about the brand, whereas just your personal name doesn't. Does that make sense?
Totally does. Yeah, there's a real strength there of, yeah, literally everything then can align with this. It becomes almost like it's the call to action in itself, because everything then bonds and binds in with it, which is, yeah, so powerful. It almost gets to a point then, does it, where you don't need the strap line, you don't need that kind of secondary line, because it kind of does tell you everything, and then so there's no scratch and kind of like, what is this all about, because you kind of just understand it from that first line. Is when people or marketers create that, almost that description underneath the key kind of brand name, is that kind of like an excuse? Is that a sort of an admittance of like, yeah, we didn't really get it good enough, so we've had to actually explain it underneath?
I'm laughing because I have a great example of that. Yes, sometimes. So example I'm thinking of is in the States. We have a very popular retail business called Fast Signs, and they make signs, but their tagline forever, that's trademarked, is more than fast, more than signs. Like they're making an excuse for their name. Like they obviously outgrew their name. And that happens a lot. That's when I think, yeah, they should have just changed the name instead of trying to make excuses for it, or trying to, yeah. So sometimes that strapline, tagline is a way of explaining the name, but then other times, sometimes it's not needed. We named a frozen yogurt franchise Spoon Me. It needed no tagline. A tagline would have detracted from the name. The name was so perfect on its own. But then other times, having a tagline can, if you can tie it into your name, it can really help. And sometimes some company will come to us and they already have a name and they need a tagline. One in particular is Red Oak Realty. We couldn't really play off Red Oak, so we played off the fact that it had to appeal to both buyers and sellers, and that's hard to do when a tagline has to reach multiple audiences. So the tagline that we did was nice move. And so it's like, yes, if you're selling, you're going to have an enjoyable experience, and if you're buying, you're going to have an enjoyable experience. And also, if you're either way, nice move is like, yeah, good choice. So that tagline worked well. But yeah, sometimes it's just, it's trying to explain something rather than enhance it.
So does this work? I know you've done a lot of work with, some very, very big brands. It's brands that everybody will be familiar with. With that kind of an organization where the master brand is literally globally famous and globally known, does what you're describing here, and the SMILE acronym obviously is super clear, it's lovely that you've shared that because it's really, really practical for everybody listening. Does this kind of brand approach and this naming approach work for kind of sub brands, so product brands or service brands that exist within the master brand, if we were to call it that? Can this be done at a very kind of local, very kind of local kind of level, if you like, within an organization, particularly a larger one?
Well, I think that the master the master brand obviously is always king, and that's what people come for. But sometimes the brand wants to get away from, because a lot of, like, look, Google, where there's nothing you can there's nothing you can really do for that, but and it's so recognized now. But sometimes they'll hire us to name a product or a service, and it's completely separate. So not everything has to fit under that umbrella perfectly. An example though of when someone they have a master brand name, but they want to do something a little different. A great example is Ben and Jerry's, right? Ben and Jerry's is not a creative name, but their flavor names are really fun. So they have, Cherry Garcia, Chunky Monkey, Liz Lemon. So they have a lot of fun that way. So it is possible to kind of make a departure, so to speak.
Mm. So I've sort of seen, certainly in my career, many, many years in marketing, I've noticed that there've been, a number of times where there's been either a merger or acquisition where, one brand that in its own sector has been very, very well known has been taken over by another generally larger player. And then the kind of the sub brands, if you like, or the brand that's been taken over is then completely consumed by the bigger brand. How do you see that kind of playing out? Because it feels like if a customer of the smaller brand that's just been bought has been very, very loyal, has possibly, had that long-term relationship with that brand, and has really bought into it and feels loyal towards it, but now it's owned, or the people and the products are actually owned by another entity. That must be really hard when it comes to translating across those values and the core kind of offering, I guess, behind that original brand, because it kind of can very easily get lost, can't it?
Yeah, well, people don't like change either, right? Especially if they're brand loyal. And then sometimes, do you remember when SurveyMonkey got they got bought, or they changed the name of the parent company, and people freaked out because not everyone, but I think a lot of people love the name SurveyMonkey, but they're still using the SurveyMonkey name. So yeah, I think if it's possible to continue using the name, and not because the people, especially if you have a small brand that you have brand loyalists from the beginning, and they're very, they're kind of clinging to it, and they don't want it to change. Yeah, if you can avoid the change. Can you think of a specific example though where that's happened?
Well, I've seen it just really with sort of what one particular client. Actually, I can't really name them. They're an existing client, and possibly wouldn't kind of if I did this on my podcast, but they'll know listening to this who they are. They're in a let's call it a technical sector. They are now owned by a very, very big global organization. And yet they've really, really struggled to amalgamate what are very, very different brands in terms of the naming of the brands. And it's taken, I would say, probably 3 or 4 years to lose or evolve the brands into this new entity. And for me, one of the biggest challenges that they've faced is the internal communication of the brand. It isn't probably so much about the customers understanding it, because if you're very, very clear with a marketing campaign, you can often get the customer to switch. They understand it. If you're good with your marketing, they'll switch. But it's the habits internally. So the company that's been bought by this big parent company still use the old product names. They still use the old brand. They almost like refuse to talk in the
Oh,
name of the big parent. And of course, then that proliferates out into the marketplace. And so then you get confusion. It's hard. It's really
yeah,
hard.
yeah, no, absolutely. And when we take a company through a name change, as we often do, we really advise them when you announce the new name or names, you have to change it everywhere all at once, and you have to roll it out all at once, and people have to stop using the old. And it's hard. It's really hard. But yeah, otherwise it just causes mass confusion and chaos.
And it is a tricky one, isn't it? So you're kind of advocating then a revolution rather than evolution. Is it literally on a Monday morning at 9 a.m. everybody comes in and
Yes.
we are completely rebranded? That there's
Yeah.
no kind of evolution over time here.
Yes, and one thing that's important, so one thing we do when we work with clients in this way is we have a spreadsheet, the mother of all spreadsheets for name changes and rebrands. It tells you, it's a checklist of here's all of the places you could possibly need to change your name. We're constantly updating it. And so that's something that you can assign to the organization in advance, have stakeholders in each, you're in charge of, digital communications, you're in charge of printed communications, you're in charge of, changing the name, all of the tiny little things that you might never think of, but you have to do it. And when you do that rollout, it's important to get the employees on board, because if they're not, then they're going to be confused, right? So sometimes that's what's behind all of the confusion. It's not an unwillingness. It's just, hey, nobody told this, nobody explained this. So when we change a name, we'll often go in and do a presentation to the full marketing department, sometimes to the company. And this is this is why the name change happened. This was the process. So they can kind of feel like they're part of it. And also, people want to know, well, why wasn't I asked for my opinion? We get that a lot. So we have to explain, we assigned a committee, the company would say we assigned a committee and this is how it went down. But yeah, and we never know. I mean, we just worked on naming an organization that's more than 100 years old, and we've done it before successfully, but people were really clinging to the old name. They were being forced to change their name. It's one thing if you're like, yeah, we've outgrown our name, or maybe it's really dated, like it has an E in front of it, like eHarmony is a very dated name. And so people want to change. They're like, God, this name makes me cringe. I'm so embarrassed. That's easier for us to do because people want something new. But when they're being forced to change the name for, let's say, legal conflict of interest, or a breakup of the partnership, and people are just clinging to the old name, that's really hard, because we're going in with people saying, no, we love our name, we're never going to get anything better. So that's always a big challenge. But we recently renamed a number of healthcare centers in Los Angeles here, in California, and I was getting a lot of resistance in the beginning from people saying, well, no, our name is so perfect. And the new names, when we finally got down to the 3 finalists, the CEO said, I would be thrilled with any of these names. And that was just the best feeling, because we went from like, oh, this is going to be hard, just someone, not just the CEO, but the rest of the team really embracing the new names.
That's brilliant. It's lovely kind of when that plays out, I guess, isn't it? Because you just know you're doing a good job, and there's that clarity, you've hit the sweet spot. What happens when it kind of, and I'd be really kind of fascinated to see this mother of all spreadsheets, because that sounds incredible. The checklist, the ultimate checklist must be, quite a big thing. But what happens when it's outside of, I guess, your kind of direct control? I'm thinking when you have a big, say, supply chain, or a big long value chain on the sales end of the process. And obviously there could be rollout through, I don't know, high street retail, or, you have a lot of resellers, or maybe brokers or resellers who are going to be, hopefully, on board with the new brand. That must get more difficult.
Sure. Yeah. The further away you get from the core organization, the more difficult it's going to be for people to change. Things will get lost in the process. But one thing that you can do is like immediately have your website redirect to your old website, domain name redirect to your new one. So, things like that, where, everybody changes their email over and has that forwarded to their old email address. But yeah, when you get into like further and further away into supply chain and all of that, yeah, it will be, not everything's going to be perfect. It's never really smooth. And, one time we worked on a big rebrand for this company that really had outgrown their name. And when it came time to, and they got a great new name from us, but when it came time to execute it, they just decided it was going to be too much work. So they stuck with their old name.
Wow, gosh, you even see that after all that effort and energy and buying into it, and then suddenly it's like, actually, it's a little bit too tricky.
Yeah, paying for the trademark, going through the whole trademark
Wow.
process, buying a domain name, all of that, and then they just decide, yeah, we're not really ready to let go.
That's interesting. Really interesting. And the other kind of thing I was really interested to get your sort of take on this one. You've mentioned website there and the kind of the redirection. I mean, if a brand is very, very well established in its market, that 100-year brand, is a great example. It might not be relevant, but say a brand has been very, very well known. It's maybe got 20 years of heritage, and particularly digitally, that it's very, very strong. So it's got a lot of SEO that's very, very well established. It kind of knows what it is, but that also Google and others are available. But Google also knows exactly what it is. So it's got this kind of SEO legacy. And then you change the brand name and you're starting pretty much from ground zero again. That must be very difficult to manage, though.
Yeah, that's hard. It is hard. I mean, and you have to build it up again. I think though that, when you do change your name, it's an opportunity for you to get back in touch with all of your former customers. I mean, that's the great thing. Like, 30 years ago, doing a name change was very different. How would you get in touch with everybody? Now you send out an email, you promote it in social media, you change the website. There's, so even if someone is, off the grid, in Madagascar, when they come back to civilization, they're going to be able to find you. That's the beauty of it. But I think when people do the name change, and by the way, if you go on our website, eatmywords.com, and you click on see our names or portfolio, you can see a bunch of before and afters, and they're really inspiring. And I think that that's when people start to get excited, because when it's hard to let go, but then they're like, oh, but we could have a name like that. Then that does get people to be a little more, curious and like, okay, maybe that could happen for us. And like, we're always confident we can do it. But yeah, and it's also when people they can't think of anything better. So they're like, how could there possibly be anything better than this? And it happened. It's happened. There is an app for people to record on their phone if they're in a bad situation, or they need, maybe they're at a protest, they suddenly find themselves at a protest or a dangerous situation. And it was for the longest time called Witness. And it was about, if you were seeing things, you could live stream. And this is before live stream was before anybody else was doing live stream. They had, a really big user base. So they were Witness. They had to change their name for legal purposes. And they didn't think we could do anything better. And we named it Parachute, because it was like to the rescue, which is what the feeling that people wanted. It was putting a more positive spin on it. And they liked the name better. So it can be done.
I love the way that I was just going to say, I love the way that even the way you just described that it came through with real passion, Alexandra, the way you kind of just described it there. This is a real kind of energizer, isn't it? Is branding and, renaming your brand an energizer? Because that's what I feel is coming through here. This is something that people should embrace and kind of feel excited by.
Absolutely. And I apologize for interrupting. You can start fresh. We renamed a bank that was more than 100 years old. It was a award-winning regional bank, and it was named the First National Bank of Syracuse. But it wasn't in the Syracuse that people here in the States know, Syracuse, New York. It was in Syracuse, Kansas, which is a tiny little town, an hour from the closest airport, which is a tiny little airport. So the name wasn't doing them justice, and they had it for a very long time. People that worked at the bank a lot of them had worked there over 20 years. So we went back and met with them, and they wanted a name that was more of a maverick name, more inspired, and that would, be more aspirational. So their tagline at the time was making dreams come true. So we use that in the name to kind of drive the direction of the name. And we rebranded them Dream First. So, it's still, like First National Bank of Syracuse. Now they're Dream First. It's aspirational. It's very different. It really stands out in a sea of sameness when it comes to bank names. and people really like it. And they are helping people, finance their farms and their expensive farming equipment. And it's helping generation after generation of families make their dreams come true. So that was one, and very well embraced. And look, not everybody is going to love your name right away. I remember we rebranded this um, organization for professional women called the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs and Executives, FWENE. It was really a mouthful. Both the name was a mile long, the acronym was really clunky, and we rebranded them Watermark. And it was all about raising, leaving your mark, making an indelible impression, rising to a higher level. And it did not, they were smart. They assigned a committee from the board, so a very small group, to go through the name change process with us. And it wasn't loved by everybody in the beginning. And now, it's probably been over 10 years. They can't imagine being named anything else. So, but sometimes it takes time for people to, look at the name Google. Not everybody loved it the first time they heard it, but names tend to grow on people.
Mm. And how does it kind of play out then with the kind of, obviously we're living in a very international world or global world. As soon as you put yourself online, you're global, even if you serve, your local community. How does it kind of play out in terms of being careful with translation? Because obviously we're talking here in English, we both know, and everybody listening to this predominantly will know exactly what we're describing when you say words like dream first and things like that, because it translates in English very, very nicely. It's a very dangerous area, though, if you start to use words that maybe have less kind of clarity in the translation. What do you do? How do you protect against that?
Well, we work with a group called Transatlantic Translation Group, TTG. Transatlantic, yeah, TTG. It's a long name, Transatlantic. Yeah, we send, when we're working with clients that need a name to work globally, we go through them to make sure it doesn't mean anything untoward, or and we don't. And the trick is they use professional linguists, so you're really getting somebody that knows. It's not just, oh, my friend speaks Spanish. It's like, and these are people that's what they do for a living, is they analyze things and look for language difficulties and challenges. So yeah, I mean, we were naming some software recently, and we sent them a bunch of names, and only one of them meant diarrhea in another language. So that was good. Yeah, but you always have to expect something to happen. But and I tell people, check the Urban Dictionary. Even stateside, check the Urban Dictionary, or which is a hotbed of hormonal teenage boys just writing the dirtiest things that they can. But just check, just in case it doesn't mean any slang things, because we see that more than anything. Is someone will name something. I mean, there was famously a group, a chain of Mexican. Oh my God, this was so bad. I even hate to say it. Now that I live in San Diego, I'm 30 minutes from the border of Mexico. But this was such a bad name. I grew up here, and this is a slur, but it was a group of 68 coffee shops in the Midwest, and they called themselves Beaners. And Beaner it's like saying the N-word to a Mexican. It's so disparaging. And I think people had told them that, but they ignored it, or they thought it wasn't a big deal. And when they finally got around to changing their name, I mean, and this was years ago, it cost, well over $1 million. And, now they have a pretty forgettable name. But yeah, just from the beginning, do your research. Not Amazon, Whole Foods, which I guess is owned by Amazon, they have in their stores, they have like cafes, and they partner with local businesses. And one in Seattle partnered with a local Asian restaurant called Yellow Fever. And it's just like, it's a racial, it's a slur, it's a sexual slur. And it's also a really deadly disease that people still die from to this day. So they didn't do the research, and they got eviscerated for it online. But I was going to tell you, Neil, when we were talking about SEO and changing names and digital, look at Twitter, right? That just changed their name to X. And we're seeing that, when you're talking about the supply chain, how many times have you been on somewhere where you go to share your story and it still has Twitter, right? And even when people still haven't fully embraced the X. And so they'll say like X, formerly Twitter, right? And who knows when that will happen, if it will ever. I mean, eventually it will happen. I think that's a terrible name, by the way. I don't know anyone that was like, yeah, that's a great name. Yeah, no, to me, X is like X out. Like, when you get a pop-up on your screen, the first thing you do is look for that X to like exit out, get it off my screen. But yeah, that's a great example.
I was going to ask you about X and what you thought.
Yeah.
And it is that kind of because it's part of a giant ecosystem, isn't it? We've all had to change, the little bird icon to an X on our websites, and few of us, I guess, have actually even done that now. You go twitter.com, it then, as you said earlier, it redirects to X. It's complicated. But those examples, I mean, they're painful. Some of those are just so common sense, aren't they? Rather than needing to even go to an agency to test them out, you just wouldn't go there. It's just, It's mind-boggling, isn't it, really, what some people will let through. And I'm guessing some of those examples will have gone through an approval process too. You just think this is multiple people falling into this trap. It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah, that's so funny you say that, because sometimes I think, wow, somebody approved that name, but yeah, with I think with X, people will for a long time not be willing to let go of Twitter. And then you think of all the businesses that Twitter spawned, like TweetDeck, right? And I love the name Twitter, by the way, and I've worked with them before. I helped them name fleets, which were their fleeting tweets. But when your name spawns so many other names and businesses, I mean, all their conference rooms were named after birds, right? Like that. And I think those are all gone now. It's so sad. By the way, I just want to let everybody know something they can do right now if they just want to like kind of jazz up their workplace. Name your conference rooms fun names. Most people, 29A, or they're named after cities. Paris is the most popular conference room name in the world, by the way, because people are, we'll just name them after cities. But why not name them after childhood toys or dance names, like the Funky Chicken? Like, wouldn't you love to say like, oh, let's meet in Funky Chicken, or we're gonna go meet in we're meeting in Cha Cha, like Lindy Hop, like something that they're conversation starters. They make people smile. And back to my, your name should make you smile instead of scratch your head. And by the way, if anyone wants to test their name, they can test it for free on our website. Just go to Eat My Words, click on test a name, and you can run your name through the smile and scratch test and see how strong it is.
I just can feel now people typing eatmywords.com into their browser right now. It's infectious. And I just love the way, Alexandra, you kind of, you just add this kind of dynamism. This is all about reigniting the original passion for organizations, isn't it? That was probably there when they founded themselves and when they were a startup and they had that kind of that real energy. This is about reinventing, reigniting that buzz, isn't it? It's ultimately, this is what it's about, isn't it? It's to keeping it young and energized and fresh and dynamic. Feels that that's the mantra here for the whole thing.
Yes, when you get to start with a new name, you're starting fresh, and it is exciting. And people like that. It's a great way to reignite your brand.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time today, Alexandra. It's been brilliant. Really, you just kind of really made me rethink actually how I sort of created. So even though my podcast is Neil Wilkins, my business is actually Viper Marketing. And the reason I created that was actually, if you think of the Top Gun film, the original call sign of the trainer of the best was call sign Viper. I just love that word. So I
I
thought
love
it's
the word
Viper.
Viper too.
Yeah, and everybody kind of knew it was marketing, and they know I'm in the UK, so it was vipermarketing.co.uk. So there was a thought process behind it, but it's become Neil Wilkins really since then. So maybe I have to go and rethink it, thanks to Alexandra's
I
guidance
love
today.
Viper. You should, yeah, Viper. And that's a great, you could have a lot of fun with that word too. And it lends itself to the theme, right? Of, not that you want to be a snake, but yeah, Viper is just, yeah, Viper is, it's a cool name. I've had it on many name lists and no one's ever chosen it.
Okay, I'm feeling better about myself now, so thank you.
Good.
I'm going to go and have a little play with that. But yes, everybody go to eatmywords.com, and I will put the other links that we've talked about before the conversation. I'll put those into the description below as well, so people can kind of find out a little bit more about you, as well as the work that you're doing, because yeah, there's some very, very exciting stuff. And if people are not feeling empowered by the power of brand names at the end of this call, I do not know what is wrong with them, but I'm sure a lot of people will be coming in your direction. So thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Neil.